Welcome to this week's Tab Media Special Report. I'm your host, Jennifer Rash, and this week we're talking about caregiving for families with a diagnosis of dementia. Joining me is Willie Brunetti, who has a long history of caregiving in his family. He is a retired Air Force officer and holds a doctorate of educational ministry from New Orleans Seminary. Willie, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so everywhere, every family, we all know somebody. It may be our family, it may be a friend's family, but we all know somebody who's dealing with a diagnosis of dementia. And a family pretty much distraught on what to do and how to just survive this. So I'd love to talk to you about that today and talk about all that you've learned. Tell us a little bit about your story and then help us work through all of these pieces.
Okay. Well, I have cared over the years for my father, who had a vascular dementia. My mother and mother-in-law lived with us for a total of 7 years in the same house.
Wow.
At the same time.
Wow.
That was a very interesting, tough subject. And I cared for my wife for a period of about 15 years with an initial diagnosis of frontal temporal lobe dementia. But later, we discovered that was not a proper diagnosis, and she had a neurodegenerative disease called progressive supranuclear palsy.
Okay.
And I cared for her pretty much 24/7 for the last 3 years of her life.
Really? Wow.
But what I've discovered is that most people really don't plan to be a family caregiver. They
What do you mean
kind of just
by that?
want to. Well, when I go down, I teach a class at New Orleans Seminary. And when I ask them if they know what the mortality rate is in the county where they live, and I tell them it's 100%, they don't believe me.
Oh.
Because they all think they're immortal. They're all in their 30s and 40s, and they haven't looked at life enough to see that things are going to change. Their parents are going to get older. They're no longer going to be capable of doing the things they're capable of now, and they're going to need support.
It's hard to watch. Though.
And
it's so hard to
generally
watch.
that support comes from the family.
Right.
Because I can say I took care of my dad, took care of my mom, took care of my wife, and I've helped other people deal with their things, the various diseases. Dementia, in my mind at least, is one of the most difficult because it's, I don't know what the right phrase would be, it's very demanding.
Okay.
Not only on the individual, but on the family as well. What you discover is with a dementia patient, as they become more and more, are actually less and less capable, the family has to be more and more adept at how to deal with that problem with and dementia is kind of an umbrella word.
True.
Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. There's a frontal temporal lobe dementia. There's all sorts of dementias. Alzheimer's just happens to be the most well diagnosed and most frequently diagnosed.
Right.
And what you discover is as they begin to deteriorate, they're less and less capable of dealing with reality. The left side of the brain is what it affects mostly. And that's where all the logic, where all the words, where all the social skills, all those things are on that side. All the curse words are on the right side.
Well, that's interesting.
And they find you got to learn how to deal with
acting differently than
that loss of capability.
Okay.
When they can't remember where they left things. My wife was an RN, and she took a class in dementia and managing the patients. And one of the things they said, if you lose things when you come home, if you lose your keys,
right,
and you can't find your keys, that's not a problem. But if you always find your keys in the freezer, then you might want to consider there's a problem coming.
Okay, so not to scare people, a few lapses of forgetting something here there might not mean.
Yeah, that's it. And it's not. It's not totally associated with age. It's not an old individual's problem.
Okay.
Dementia is a brain disease that can affect anyone at any age, basically.
Wow.
And it's not pretty.
So from your experience with multiple levels here. When would you suggest that people start working with a doctor, someone, just to start talking about it?
Once you see they begin to deteriorate, that's when to do it. You don't wait until it's already a trauma.
So any kind of sign,
start looking.
Okay.
Find a neurologist. Find a gerontologist.
Yes, that was my question too. A neurologist would be the logical first step, probably for MRI and that kind of thing.
All that kind of stuff, for the testing, for the evaluating, for doing all those things. And it's not fun, because generally the patient doesn't want to admit they're no longer capable of doing everything they've ever been able to do before.
So how do you have that conversation, and how do you
very carefully
negotiate this new doctor's appointment?
It becomes a very sitting down and saying, hey, look, we need to talk. Okay. There are some things that I see changing that I'm pretty sure you need to see changing that aren't a good sign. We need to have it evaluated. And the only way to have it evaluated is to take it to a doc.
Okay.
And a neurologist is the normal thing. A gerontologist would also be another doc who would have a capability of dealing with those types of dementias, because most general practice docs deal with so many diseases that to bring it down to that one, they're not real good at it. And I thought if they're general practice docs, here's that, he's going to yell at me. But
but the specialty is what's needed, right?
And there's testing and things you can do that will indicate and show you. And then as the disease progresses, you continue to monitor that. Eventually they forget who you are. Perhaps they forget how to deal with, how to cook, how to do things that they've normally done. And you got to watch that. I had a friend who's just, his wife began to develop the dementia, and she would come and say, I haven't talked to my mother in months. She hasn't called me. I don't know what's wrong with her. Her mom's had been dead for a very long time.
Oh, wow.
And you use what the Alzheimer's Association calls a therapeutic fib.
Okay.
Because if you tell them, well, mom's been dead, all that's going to do is bring their grief back. But if you tell them, oh, I talked to her today, she's been out of town, everything's fine, I'll call her and she'll call us. And 5 minutes later, the patient doesn't remember she even asked.
Okay, so it's actually kinder to not put them back through what they're not remembering anyway.
Yeah, not remembering, because you don't want to put them back in that grief.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I know that's hard to...
It's hard to assimilate if you're the caregiver,
right?
Unless you've been trained,
right?
Unless you've looked at how this disease progresses. I didn't know what progressive supranuclear palsy was.
Fair.
Because less than about 5% or so of the whole world has progressive supranuclear palsy.
Wow.
But I had to make myself a worldwide expert.
Okay.
Because it was my wife.
Well, how do you do that? So whatever the diagnosis is, how do you become the expert for your family?
There are organizations that, like, I teach for the Alabama Alzheimer's Association.
Okay.
They've got an 800 number that you can call, and they have clinicians who you can call and say, hey, mom's displaying this trait, or dad's doing this trait. How do I deal with that? And there's people there that can help. There are books out there. There's a book called Learning to Speak Alzheimer's.
Okay.
Another book called Loving Someone with Dementia. There are internet sources. There are all sorts of. There's another one here in Alabama is Dementia Friendly Alabama.
Okay.
Yeah. And I've got a booklet out here that I'll give you that's got all the various organizations by county in the state of Alabama that are available to help you.
Great resource. Yes.
And there's the Alabama Senior Association, I think it's association, has also got a thing that where each region of the state has an organization that provides support for caregivers.
Well, we'll be sure to put a lot of these links in the show notes for us. Again, we're talking with Willie Brunetti, who is a leading expert in caregiving for families with a diagnosis of dementia. He's lived it. He teaches it. He's an expert in so many levels. So those resources we'll be sure to put in the show notes that you're mentioning, and then maybe some others we have. I know we've done stories in our Tab Media Group publications, the Alabama Baptist as well as the Baptist paper, and both of those you can search online for caregiving or dementia or even Willie's name, and that will help you find some resources we've published. Okay, so what about a case where it's not your family, but you might notice someone else's family member and you're not sure they're noticing?
Yep.
So maybe it's you're a member of a Sunday school class, maybe you're in a club, a weekday club of some type, or you see them at the YMCA, I don't know, something, but you're noticing. What is a way to, or how should we approach that if we're noticing someone else's family member?
I think that I like to say very subtly.
Okay.
Because you don't want to start what's the right word, an argument.
Right,
you want to say,
right.
have you noticed?
Right,
and
right,
let's
right.
do it as a side.
Okay.
Not, like say in a Sunday school class, don't sit up and
point it out. Right.
it's do it in secret. Do it with somebody, and do it as a loving. Say, look, I've seen this. I've noticed this.
Want to make sure they know.
Have you seen the same thing that I'm seeing?
Right. And sometimes that would probably be a case of they had, but they didn't want to address it. And then when somebody else said it, it's like, oh, okay. There's affirmation, maybe.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, even with a dementia patient, is they see themselves deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
They either respond with anger, or they respond and become very, very withdrawn.
Okay.
Because they don't want to admit they're no longer capable.
That makes sense.
So you have to work your way in.
Right.
And there are, like I say, like with the Alzheimer's Association, they're out there to help you deal with that kind of stuff as the family. One of the things we did with my family is we set my children and my grandchildren down, and I explained the whole process to them. This is how this disease is going to develop. This is how this disease is going to progress. This is what mom or grandma or granny is going to, and this is how you're to deal with it.
Okay, so that's helpful. Give them expectations, give them understanding, and give them assignments, really, right? So we understand what we're doing.
Well, with my wife, she had her cerebellum no longer provided signals. If she would pick up her left foot, it wouldn't tell the right foot to hold her up, so she fell.
Oh my.
She would, when she ate, she would often aspirate her food because it couldn't tell the difference between matter and air.
Wow. Okay.
And eventually she lost use of her words. And so we had to learn how to deal with being able to convert with her and knowing she's trying to get those words out, but can't.
So frustrating too, I know.
And you just got to love on them.
And just the compassion you need to show in that moment because they're frustrated. Wow. Well, we work with several churches who are launching respite care type ministries, and those seem to be really making a difference for families. Do you have any experience with those and could speak to those?
Well, First Baptist Huntsville has recently started theirs, and I can't remember what they're calling it exactly, but
Oasis.
Oasis.
Oasis, yes.
And they have set it up whereby they have a support group that comes in for the caregivers. I did the initial training. I did how to converse with an Alzheimer's patient.
Okay.
This is what Alzheimer's and dementia is. I did about a 4-week series on all the dementias and how it works and how they developed.
Okay.
And then they put that together and have started their program. And I'm going to be occasionally helping because I end up doing all kinds of other things with this. I'm trying to teach my own seminar that I also teach in churches.
Okay.
That basically what is a caregiver, how to care for yourself. I also teach a class for churches that says what's the church's responsibility in this process?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. That's good.
Because the trauma of the dementia is so debilitating. You've got to be able to keep your spiritual life together.
Mm.
One of the things that one of the authors I had called it hopeful hopelessness.
Mm.
He said, when your world is falling down around you and your world is totally insane, the hope we have in Christ will help you deal with the trauma and help you get through it.
Mm. Good advice, for
and
sure.
when you know that your parent has a dementia or your
Mm-hmm.
spouse has a dementia, you've got to be able to keep your own spiritual life and your own spiritual strength up. And you have to help them support
Mm-hmm.
their own spiritual life. Because most of our parents grew up in church.
Mm-hmm.
And often because of their disability are no longer able to go. And you need to help them maintain that spiritual health that they've always been able to maintain because they could get to church.
How do you do that?
Through the church. The church needs to provide respite care.
Okay.
What can I do for you?
Mm-hmm.
How can I help you deal with this trauma? How can I help you, maybe bring you dinner?
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend when I was dealing with my wife. She called me one day and said, "I will be there at noon on every Wednesday, and you can leave."
Oh, just to give you a break.
And just to give me a break. I tell folks my dog, for the last 2.5 years of my wife's life, the dog went out more than I did.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a matter of helping them deal with
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the trauma of that.
Mm-hmm.
The fastest growing age group in the world are those of us over 65. And I'm older than dirt and some rocks. And I turned 65 in 2011. Somebody's turned 65 every 2,000 people have turned 65 every day since then.
Oh, my.
So the church needs, and I don't think the churches nor the communities are ready for what my friend calls the senior tsunami.
I've heard it as the silver tsunami as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting that you're, yes. But you're right.
And they need to know how we're going to deal with the trauma of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important in my mind that what I've discovered, and I've been doing this now for, I did my doctoral work. That's why the seminary evolved from my doctoral work since 2013.
Okay.
And I'm amazed at the number of churches. When I talk to other folks, I said, we haven't seen our church since Mom got sick.
So they just almost out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, out of sight, out of mind sometimes happens. For real.
What happened to Willie? Who's Willie?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
And it's a shame because that spiritual health is there.
That's true. That's so
I know
true.
with my wife, who no longer, her words weren't coming. Where I bought a TV set and put it in her room, and every Sunday morning we watched our church service, and you could see the smile.
It was familiar.
The familiar thing, the voices, the people. She could see people she knew in the audience. She could see the pastor who was, she could hear the music, and all those things cheered her up.
Mm-hmm. I've heard so many stories as well of dementia patients who couldn't have a conversation. They could not really connect, but you put them in a situation where some of the old hymns are being sung, and they knew every word.
Well, like we said, the left side, the right side's where the music is.
Wow.
With my mom, she had sundowners along with her Alzheimer's. And she would get up at night and roam the house. Now, we had it fixed so she couldn't get out. But if I could get her calmed down enough and back to bed, I would put on Southern gospel music, and she'd go back to sleep.
Soothing. Like some kind of soothing, maybe?
Just soothing, quiet. This is what she had. My grandmother was the same way. My grandfather every evening would sit down and have a Bible reading. If you were a kid at his house at 7:00 at night, everything stopped, and you sat at his feet while he read the Bible. After he passed, I found a tape of James Earl Ray, who sounded just like my grandfather, reading the Bible. And when my grandmother was in the memory care unit, we played that for her.
Oh,
And it
I'm
calmed her
sure
right down.
resonated. Well, I've heard so many people talk about with sundowners to have a routine. So it might be that you, in the morning, you open the shades and you play upbeat music and you have a routine. And then at night, you shut the shades, you bring the
Calm
lights
it down.
down, and you play a soothing music. But there's a familiar routine. Does that,
a routine is good.
recommend that as well?
Oh, yeah, because that helps them deal. Because they're used to having a routine.
Okay.
And when they get to the point in their dementia, they can't reconstruct that lifestyle that they've always lived with.
So that helps them know it's time to go to bed, time to go to sleep, time to get up, time to move around, that kind of thing. Well, what about, you're speaking about how you were in the house and your dog went out more than you did. Again, how do you help the caregiver actually be okay with letting someone else help you care for your loved one?
A lot of times they really feel if they let somebody else play, they're failing.
Why is that?
Because their mind says, I've got it. It's my job to take care of mom or dad or my spouse. I can't let somebody else come in and do my job.
Oh, okay.
But unless they sit back and rejuvenate and get themselves back and allow their minds to come back together, that same anxiety they're feeling, they're going to transfer to the patient.
Oh, I didn't think
and
about that.
And the patient is
Okay.
going to become anxious.
Because they can sense the
They
anxiety?
can feel that.
Oh, okay. So you're actually helping your loved one if you
take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself. Take a little break here and there.
Take some respite.
Yeah.
Don't. It was nice that when that lady would show up on Wednesday, I could go out, have a. It's not as much fun eating by yourself, but go have a little quick meal.
Yeah.
Just walk around the mall, go do some shopping, go do
whatever. Take a nap, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Something that brings it back.
Yeah.
To a normal place.
Right.
Because if you're caring for someone and you're always having to be on, you're always going to have to be ready
and available
to deal with a trauma. You can't do that forever.
That's exhausting. Yes. Well, we were talking about First Huntsville launched Oasis, and that is they launched that in March. The church at Liberty Park launched their version called Pathways back in September. We have First Baptist Church Pleasant Grove has had a respite care ministry, I think since 2023 maybe. And then there are multiple other churches out there, various denominations who've been very active. And so we'll put in the show notes some resources and links so that you can hopefully find a location near where you live. But how can we encourage more churches? Because as I was looking at where these locations are, there are a few, and there are several, and they're growing, but there's not enough, because what you're saying earlier about the sheer volume and number of people in this situation and the need that's going to be there for families. How can we help churches make this next step to see this as a priority?
I think it's an education process. The churches that I've talked to, and I've talked to churches in Louisiana and in Florida and in North Alabama to try to get them set up, to try to get something put together. It's a matter of how do you create the priority. And it's kind of like, and I'm not saying that this is wrong, but it's kind of like every Christmas, we always take care of the kids, and that's fine. We ought to take care of the kids. But there's a whole bunch of seniors out there who need Christmas as bad as the kids do.
Good point.
I teach grumpy old men Sunday school class.
I love it.
My wife tells me I'm overqualified. But what we've done, and they have done for the last 2 years, is we take up a collection, and I go to a place on Redstone Arsenal Army Base there in Huntsville.
Okay.
And I buy GI hats, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines.
Okay.
And I take it to the local veterans home there in Huntsville.
Oh, that's really nice. That means a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, give a guy, where were you? I was a Marine. Here's your hat.
Wow. Wow.
Or I was an Air Force guy, so
Yeah.
here's your Air Force hat.
That has to mean a lot. And that's something we don't think about.
Yeah.
Just simple moments like that. Well, even, some of the respite care programs are really large and have lots of volunteers and are working really, really well. But even a small start could be one step toward making a difference, right? Like maybe one class, one Bible study group could say, we're going to have this ministry effort.
Yep.
We're going to, hey, Willie has this situation and we're going to show up at his house every Wednesday at noon and we're going to take turns or whatever. Well, it could be a very small step, but something to start moving in that direction.
With my seminar, I'm free. I don't charge.
Okay. So you could come into churches and just say, kind of help them talk through what's possible.
I did for a church I did a few years ago. I did an Alzheimer friendly church. Train the deacons on how you deal with getting them sit down, get them quiet when they stand up and begin to shout and do those. Because a lot of times they depends on their what stage they're in.
Okay.
And the pastor may say, and let us pray, and they might jump up and start praying.
Okay. So what do you do? Just let them go?
Let them go. You say, thank you.
Okay.
But it's just a matter of training and getting it. It's like with First Baptist. I came in and trained them. This is how you communicate with a dementia patient. This is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's.
Okay.
This is what a caregiver is. This is what the church's responsibilities are. And then they went from there. And hopefully here in the next, that we're talking about in the fall, me coming and actually doing my seminar for them.
Oh, good.
To kind of enhance their process for the caregiver. Because one of the things I do talk about is taking care of yourself.
Yes, yeah. And back to the point of the topic here today is not only encouraging those that are in this situation to take that seriously, to take care of yourselves, but also to help all of us that are surrounding others to be aware, to try to find ways we can help. Because what you don't want to do is say, hey, call me if you need anything. You don't want to do that, right? You want to say, hey, here's something I can do. I have the means to do, or I have the skill to do, or I have the time to do, or whatever it is, and I would like to do it. Here are 3 options. Which one is best for you, or something like that?
Within my Grumpy Old Man Sunday School class, I've got one gentleman who mows lawns.
Okay.
He mows everybody. He goes out and takes their lawn. If they have a problem, he fixes it. I've got a couple of guys who are handymen, and they go fix things.
I love that.
This is broke or that's broke.
Yeah.
And even providing transportation. Hey, you need transportation to the dock.
That one is a big one.
Or here's a meal.
Right. So you never know what one item you could do, one activity, one little thing could make a big difference.
I know I had a cousin who called me and said, Willie, what do you need? I said, well, this was in the really tough times with the wife. I said, I really need some junk food and adult conversation. And so they brought me a Big Mac, and we sat down and...
See, I love that.
Because one of the things I really missed after I said was conversation. Just because the wife was totally void of conversation. She couldn't anymore.
Right.
And I didn't want to push it because I knew it frustrated her. But I needed to come, the dog didn't talk back.
Right. Well, and on that note too, not only, so you can have adult conversation and a serious conversation, but also the person with the diagnosis, I think a lot of times when others know that that's a situation, they don't know what to do. And so they either stop talking to that person or they stop treating them with the same level of respect. So that's important too, right? Yeah. Not to be fearful, to not at least engage and give them.
One of the things I've discovered is a lot of times they'll go, well, I can't believe I went over and visited so-and-so and she didn't even know who I was. I've known her for over 20 years.
Okay.
Well, I got news for you. She doesn't know who anybody is.
Yeah.
It's not because she doesn't want to.
Yeah.
It's because her brain is deteriorated to the point where her memory is gone.
But she still was able to show her the respect to have that conversation, right? Yeah.
It's like with my mom, she didn't know who I was.
Right.
But I took care of her anyway.
Right. Absolutely. Well, Willie, we will put your contact information in the show notes as well, because I know there are lots of groups out there who would love to learn more and to bring you in. So we'll put that in so you can share, and then have other resources linked. But thanks for spending some time with us. We appreciate
My pleasure.
you.
Thank you. I love getting out and talking about this, because I think it's a subject that nobody wants to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. We plan for everything. When we're young, we plan on what am I going to be when I grow up? What am I going to have to do to get that? What college am I going to go to? What trade school am I going to do? How am I going to get married? Do I want to, where are we going to live? How are we going to live? Do I want to buy a house? But nobody ever plans end of life issues, because they're too tough to talk about.